Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and inside of this game overview and gameplay video, I am checking out Legacy of Thracks, The Awakening. This comes from Savita Studio and is landing on Kickstarter inside of April of this year. Now, if you're looking for a specific date, I'll place that in the pinned comment and video description for you to check out. Here today, we are going to go through what you can see here on the table, which I've already set up for solo play, where I'm controlling one faction. And I'm going to be going up against the Shadow player, which is an AI-controlled player within the game itself. I'll be going through all the facets of the gameplay in a solo perspective to help you make an informed decision as to whether or not this is for you. Legacy of Thracks, The Awakening is a Euro-Ameri hybrid competitive epic fantasy game with unique semi-co-op elements, and you absolutely can play this solo. We'll be doing so here in this video. You're going to be controlling one of the clan heroes, for example, the warrior. You can get the mage, you can have the engineer. In my case here, I have the warrior, and the warrior is currently sitting up in his capital up there. His mini has a shield and a cape, and right beside it is one of the lost ones, another entity that you'll be controlling within the game itself, but there's differences between what your hero can do and what the lost one, that figure, can do for you. During your journey, you're going to hire a lost soul to bring in crystals that are hidden to the surface and be able to collect relics. And you're going to use these crystals to complete secret quests, overcome magical barriers. You're going to be able to move your hero and capture villages to take special advantages, be able to build roads to make the cost of moving between things easier, or capture a fortress to increase your overall glory, or capture castles to increase your income. You're going to have many options in order to bolster your clan to get ready for the final push to try and win the game against the Shadow player. So while controlling one of the clans in solo mode, I've got the warriors, while the movement and actions of the Shadow player are simulated by event cards that you'll see as I go through a round or two of gameplay. Your goal is to reach Dimara before the game ends and have more victory points than the Shadow has. It's worth mentioning, as you've seen in the prior shot, there are a couple of components that have been printed out. These will be of higher quality in the final version. Remember, everything you're seeing here is in prototype form and is subject to change. We have here components that you'll need as part of the solo mode. One of them is this Arwell's Blessing board here, where you're not only tracking the Shadow's victory points on the right-hand side to ensure that you've got a leg up on the Shadow player, but also have some advantages to the left that let you know you can do specific things at certain times in order to help you out. Some other components very important for solo play are these chance cards, and these chance cards show in black, green, and red. You'll see numbers across the top of them, 1/2, 1/3, and 1/6. This is letting you know the odds of rolling and landing one of these chance cards, which then will activate the solo and co-op event card, which is sitting on top. Now you'll notice that the very first one is already flipped face up. That's because you get advanced knowledge as to which of the three options has the highest chance of actually occurring when you roll this die, as it has 3 black sides. As it goes down the row, if you happen to roll the green, well, you're going to have a little bit of a surprise and won't know exactly what the Shadow player's up to until it flips over. So this thereby gives you a 50-50 chance that it will do exactly what you can see as the card is faced up, or it could do something to surprise you as well, which will certainly change up your strategy as you play through the game. Now, the overall goal of the solo player is to play out here on the world map by trying to bolster your resources, collecting relics, trying to receive as much glory points as possible, and completing quests in order to complete magical barriers. Now, you're probably wondering what those are. We quickly ran past them just moments ago, but way up at the very top of the map there, you're going to notice a piece of paper sitting there. And again, higher quality component when it comes out in the final version, of course, but that is going to give you the loadout of the magical barrier that you need to essentially get through. It's basically a gauntlet of magical barriers you need to get through once you arrive at Dimara. And the cool thing about it is you can actually complete magical barriers before you make that final push in Dimara. And that's what's really interesting inside the game. By cashing in 5 relics, you can then complete a magical barrier. If you receive glory points to a certain extent, you can then cash those in order to complete a magical barrier. And you can also complete quests, and you even start with a quest when you begin the game, and that will allow you to close up a magical barrier. Now, let's go ahead and zoom in on that, and I'll talk a little bit more about why it's so important and why it's such a major focus in order to win the game. Now your goal is to enter Dimara, and when you do, it's essentially in an outer dimension on the upper left-hand part of the game board here. You'll notice a portal on the far right-hand side across the river. You can access this portal, which is known as the Nordic portal, from any other portal in the game. So when you're ready to make the gauntlet run against the magical barriers, you can then jump through a portal to that Nordic one up there, and you begin to move across the path that leads you through columns of magical barriers as you attempt to rack up VP to win the game overall. Now the next space right beside the Nordic portal there is more of a square. It represents gold, and it is called the magical path. When you get there and you move on to that space, you need to pay 3 gold and be prepared to do so prior to going there. So make sure you have that 3 gold stashed away so that when you make the move to the Nordic portal, you don't have to backtrack realizing you forgot to get enough gold to even enter the gauntlet of the magical barrier. And then when you're in those magical barriers, you're going to move through those trying to complete as many as possible in order to hopefully complete them all, racking up VP as you go. So now let's talk about each of these magical barriers and what these symbols mean on them. It's all quite easy once it's explained, but essentially at the very top of the magical barrier, and there's a number of these inside the game box and they vary in difficulty. The thing I want to really point out to you is there is a thin line that connects across the top row of those circle icons, and right now they comprise mainly of gray and green at the top, but you'll notice the thin green line that goes across all of them at the top of the sheet. That is letting you know that this magical barrier is easy. If it's yellow, then it's of medium difficulty. If it's red, it's hard. And if it's purple, it's a nightmare situation. And so you're going to want to learn your way through these to get better at the game, but you're always going to be able to tweak the difficulty of your solo play by flipping out magical barriers, which is quite awesome. Let's place our focus on understanding the iconography for each of the magical barriers. But just before I do that, want to mention that in the final version of the game, you will have a covered up token that's large enough to go over top of magical barriers here to then tie into how long of a game you want to play. Right now it's wide open, so we're playing the epic version of the game where all these magical barriers are available. If we want more of a normal mode or a rush mode, you'll have a token of varying size that's going to sit on top of these magical barriers, blocking off a number of them, not requiring you to complete them in order to get through the game. So it's worth mentioning that. I can't show it to you in this current prototype, but in a regular game, if I was playing Rush, which is how I'm playing this one, I would have a token sitting on top blocking up a number of these magical barriers, making how many of them I need to complete a little bit easier and quicker. Now, at the very top of each magical barrier, there is a color that will let you know whether or not you need a crystal of a specific color as part of the completion of that magical barrier, or it could be any color of a crystal. So for instance, at the very top, you'll see whitish gray circle there. That means it's wide open to any color crystal in terms of usage. There's also ones that are in green that will let you know you need a specific green colored crystal to pull that one off. And then below it, you'll see in yellow, there is a number inside of it that lets you know how much gold you need to pay. Below that is in red, and that's how much HP your hero needs to pay. So you're going to want to be ready to go through this gauntlet of magical barriers. It's going to cost you in many different ways, which is why it's really important to try and complete some of these barriers before you ever enter Dimara. If you take a look underneath of each of the columns of magical barriers, you're going to see that 4 of them have a relic icon in yellow at the very bottom. This lets you know these are the ones that if you cash in 5 relics as you journey through the game world collecting them, you're able to close those magical barriers in advance. This can certainly help you out once you enter Dimara, as I've talked about before. Once you're in there, and the only other thing you can do in the game world once your hero is inside the gauntlet is essentially to move around the lost soul, but that's it. That's all you have access to, so you want to be really sure you're ready to go in there and you're prepared. Now, when you start out the game, you're going to get an action card, a battle card, and you're also going to get a quest card to begin the game. And here's my quest card. It is a sneaker card. It says capture a castle through a tunnel during this turn. That's the condition that I need to meet. I also need to have the crystals that are displayed on the card in those colors, so yellow and green, to complete this quest. And then once I do, because I completed the quest with either a yellow crystal or a green crystal, I have the choice to take a look at the magical barriers, finding one that is either whitish gray, green, or yellow, and complete that barrier. So You have to have the crystals required, and then when you actually complete a barrier, you need to make sure it matches with the color. It's worth mentioning, purple is a wild color. It's the rarest one, can be used in any of the color slots to represent the color it's actually asking for. Of course, if you're trying to clear a magical barrier that is whitish gray, you can use any crystal on a quest card to pull that off. It doesn't matter what the color is, but in this case, being that I'm on easy, all of them are gray or green, so it makes things pretty easy, of course. And if I ramp up the difficulty, well, trying to find the specific quests and the specific crystals that each barrier needs becomes a bit more difficult. Every clan has its own resource sheet, and the icons on the left-hand side are for silver, gold, mana, hero hit points, which start at 5, and you'll see that that hero hit points bar or track is divided into 3 sections, and it tells you the number of combat cards you can use in a battle based on your HP. So if you have a higher health when you start the game out, you can use up to 3 cards. Pretty powerful, but as you take hits over the course of the game, you are less able to use combat cards out of your hand, thus making battles a little more difficult. And then the very bottom one is the glory point track. This is really important because, again, this one connects back to the magical barriers you're trying to complete. You'll notice that 3 of them in certain positions are of a little bit different or more aggressive hue. When you land on those, you can complete any magical barrier you wish from up top. Every clan has a clan hero skill tree, which has 2 sides to it. You can choose how you want to develop your clan, depending on your strategy. At the very top of the track, you're going to see it says action 1/turn. You can only do this action once per turn. And in this case, for this clan, receiving glory is what you do. So when you do receive glory once per turn, you can then go ahead and spend a development point in either the left-hand side or the right-hand side. And as you see, you'll traverse down the track until you start unlocking even cooler clan abilities you can make use of in the future. On the far left-hand side of the board, underneath the art, you'll see a 4+, lets you know your base level combat power, or CP, when you go into battle. And down at the bottom, you have a location modifier, and this is just going to increase your combat power when you're at specific locations. In this case, the warrior really likes being at a fortress, gets a +2 bump for being there. Your clan will have a number of other game components like the clan-specific deck. I've already drawn 1 card up. It's in my hand. We'll talk about it later on. There's also these banners here. You'll be placing them at locations that you control, like a village, for instance, and there's an icon where those banners would go when you do control it. Roads, you have 10 of them. You can build them to place them on one of the different road spots available between 2 points that you're traveling through in order to make the cost of traveling through them cheaper. Normally, when moving from one location to another, there's a cost 1 gold per each of the road pieces. If you place a road down here, the cost is reduced by 1, thus making things cheaper in terms of moving around. You have some additional markers as well. On the outside of the game board, we have the Shadow Player deck. We'll be drawing from this as we go through the Shadow turn. We'll talk about that later on. There's also some village cards. We'll talk about how those are used later on as well. There are also 3 other decks. So we have the quest deck at the very top. I've already taken 1 into my hand to start things off. Bonus cards down below that. And then below that, we have the battle cards, and I have 1 of those in hand. Here's a look at the 3 cards I have in my hand. I currently have a battle card with a 2 on it. The condition down below says receive 1 mana. In the top left-hand corner of the card, you'll see an icon with a +1. This lets you know that if you're controlling that specific clan, you get an additional combat power or CP boost to the battle card. It would be 1, but this doesn't match with the current icon of the clan I'm controlling. So I'm looking for something like this in the future to boost up. And you'll see that as I go through combat cards, you can potentially find one that matches with your clan, and those are the best ones to have by far. And then you have the Capture the Village card in the center. This came from the Clan Warrior deck as my 1 draw, and the quest that we talked about earlier on at the far right. On the left-hand side of the game board, you likely noticed a shadow power area, a sacrificial altar area with candles, and down below, a whole bunch of sources that can be used for the shadow player. This is the area where you're basically keeping track of the majority of what the shadow player is doing during the game. We'll talk about each of these a little bit later in the video. It's worth mentioning that there is an official miniature for the shadow player that's not included as part of this prototype. However, for now, I'm using the Watcher from from Kingdom Death Monster, as it certainly represents the Shadow player very, very well, and the Shadow player begins on the Source of Life in the middle of the game board. Now let's talk about the world map. One thing I needed to mention that I just corrected was there happened to be a relic that was just floating around over here. That's been removed off the game board. And let's talk about the capitals here on this world map. There's 4 of them in total. We have the Mage capital here, if you're controlling the Mage clan. On the bottom right-hand corner of the opposite side of the game board, we have the Engineering capital. Way at the top where the 2 miniatures reside is the Warrior capital. And then at the top left-hand corner where there's 2 relics, green, yellow, and red resource crystal, that is the Shadow capital. Just before we begin gameplay, want to talk about what the different locations are around the game board so you know what these things are called. We'll worry about how they actually work when we move into gameplay though. So the first one is portals. You've seen me talk about them before, quite easy to identify. There are also healing wells found all throughout the land. You'll also find castles, tunnels, temples, fortresses, relics, mines, armories, villages, and a single market, which is currently covered in a whole bunch of resources. Let's head into the gameplay and I'll show you how the game flows and operates. We start off by upticking the day counter, unless you're starting the game off from the very beginning, which you're already on the very first day, so nothing to change here now. So inside the production phase, which makes up the very first phase of your turn, you make sure that you've upticked the day counter if you're not on the very first day, which we are, so we skip that as I mentioned. And moving to the resource board here, we now head into gathering resources. So at this point, I'm going to gain 6 gold and then 2 additional gold for every castle that I own. And that reminder is in the top right-hand corner, but currently I don't have any castles, so I don't get any additional gold beyond the 6 to start. It's also worth mentioning you can only have a max of 10 gold. Once you have 10 gold, you can only have a maximum of 5 silver. There are differences in terms of how you can spend silver versus gold. I'll leave that to you to find in the rulebook. And for the purposes of this prototype and moving forward with gameplay, we'll carry on to the mana, which you get 2 of. Just like that, we've upticked our tracks. It's worth mentioning you can only have a maximum of 10 mana as well. The next step is to do the production die roll, and this die roll is enabling the world itself to replenish resources that have been captured by clans, whether it be crystals or relics. So you'll be looking at the die roll, and whatever face that shows up, you'll be taking a look at its color, as well as any relic icons on it to determine whether you're replacing crystals at certain mines or you're putting relics on relic locations. Now, at the very beginning of the game, everything's populated and no one's taken anything yet. So because of this production roll does not need to happen, but on subsequent rounds, it'll be very important. At this point, we now move into the action phase where we get to choose from a number of different things. There's almost up to 10 different actions that you can take inside of this game. I'm going to go through a number of them with you, and there's also the fact you have your clan hero, plus in the solo mode here, we have a lost soul as another option, and they do interact with different locations differently. It's worth mentioning that the icon specific to a hero is actually at the capital, just south of the miniature itself. You'll see kind of a reddish orange hued icon. That icon is a hero specific icon. That means if you see that icon at any location, the hero is the one that needs to interact with that location to get benefits out of it. If it happens to be a blue icon, like you can see just underneath the green mine, that is a lost soul location where they can go and interact there. So we could send the lost soul, for instance, to that green mine. And something else worth noting, which I touched on very briefly earlier in the video, is movement in this game from a hero perspective is all about counting the dashed lines between 2 locations. So if we tried to move from the capital along the 2 dashed red lines towards the green crystal mine, that would cost our hero 2 gold, as there's 2 dashes between them. If you want to move a lost soul, they don't move based on gold. They move based on mana, and it's just a cost of 1, regardless of how many dashes there are. For 1 mana, which I've now knocked down on my resource board, I've moved the Lost Soul over to the right, and the Lost Soul is going to collect the yellow crystal at this location. Now let's talk about location cost, because when you arrive at a location, you don't always just get to gather whatever is there. Now with this one I just moved to, I do get to do that, as the Lost Soul is the only requirement in order to interact with this location and take an action there. So I was able to take the resource, the crystal, the yellow one, and add it to my pool, which is great. If you take a look just south towards the right-hand side of the screen there, you're going to see a fortress. And that fortress has a circle above it, an icon where the banner can potentially go if we take it over and control it. But below it, you'll notice there's a hero icon in that orange-ish hue. But to the right of it, there is a red requirement. So not only does the hero have to be at the fortress, but in order to actually take it over, the hero has to take 1 hit point worth of damage, represented by the little circle node in the top left-hand corner. Now, if there's a higher requirement for HP, there will be more of those circle nodes around the outside of the icon to tell you how much more HP you need to take to do that location action. This will help you to quickly look over the land and determine what you're able to do and what you're not able to do. So just for clarity, taking a look at the castle there in the middle of the screen, you'll see the icon for hit points with 2 of those circle nodes on either corner, letting you know if you're a hero, based on the icon to the left, you have to take 2 hit points in order to try and capture the castle, which will then provide you with some benefits. And all the benefits for capturing things and placing a control banner there and all that type of stuff is referenced on a really, really handy reference card. Here is a look at the location action reference card, really handy not only for knowing what each of the locations are called, but also, again, relaying information around what is the cost to do a location action beside each of the locations, plus to the right of it, what do you actually gain from interacting with all these different locations? And sometimes it can be cards, sometimes it can be glory, it can be gold, it can be a number of different things. So we've talked about movement, we've also talked about location actions. You can see I've already spent 1 of my 2 mana to ensure I paid for the Lost Soul moving to the mine to gain the crystal. I still have 1 more movement with this Lost Soul, which I'm going to use in a second. Let's talk about different other actions we can do on our turn. We can also buy an action card for 2 gold. When you buy an action card for 2 gold, you go ahead and draw a card from your clan-specific deck, in my case, the Warrior. I already have one to start off the game. That was the one that says capture a village. And then when you get this card in hand, you may see a bolt icon on the card. This one does not have it, but if it does, it lets you know it's an instant effect you can use right away or anytime you'd like to trigger it on your turn. But you also can choose to activate an action card you have in your hand, whether it's instant or not, as an action. You also have the ability to play bonus cards from your hand once you acquire some. I don't have any right now. As mentioned prior, you can choose to complete a magical barrier by paying 5 relics. If your hero happens to move into a space with the shadow player, you're going to have a battle. If it happens vice versa, there's still a battle going on. You also have the ability to complete a quest card if you meet the requirements of the conditions of that quest card at any point in time, whether it's in the action phase or outside of it. Same with completing a magical barrier if you do it through a quest card, or if you reach 4, 7, or 10 on the glory point track, you can then immediately go ahead and resolve that magical barrier completion. And you can also activate an instant action card anytime you wish. For 1 more mana point, I'm going to move my Lost Soul to the portal. This is going to give me some flexibility in getting my Lost Soul to different parts of the map that might be closer to a crystal that I might be aiming to try and acquire on purpose. And a portal is a great example of a spot that doesn't specify whether a lost soul or a hero can be there. There's no icon for either, so in those cases it means anybody can interact with that particular location. There is one mention to make around the portals though. If it's a hero that goes through that portal, then they do have to spend 1 HP. The HP is denoted right below the portal. If you are a lost soul, however, you get to use the portal for free. I've gone ahead and decided to have the lost soul head all the way south down, so he's very, very close next to a green crystal mine, which is another crystal color I'm really trying to go after. Next, let's focus on our hero and get our hero into a position to get some benefits for us. So I'm going to have my hero move along the road off to the west to head to the green crystal mine. Again, I cannot take that crystal resource as I'm not a lost soul, but I can still travel there. And then I'm going to travel just southeast down to the fortress. And now that I'm here, I take a look at the icon below. It is for a hero, which means I can go ahead and try to capture this location. I have to pay an HP to do so, and I'm definitely going to do just that. As you can see on the resource track for HP, it's currently up in the highest position. It's going to get knocked down by 1, moving it down a section, meaning I can only use 2 battle cards going into any battle. We paid the requirements, and now we can reap the rewards. The warrior clan has successfully captured the fortress, and now I place my clan banner on top of it. The next thing I get as a benefit for capturing this fortress is a glory point. The glory point track at the very bottom has been moved up by 1. We are aiming to try to get to that 4th position as quick as possible because that will allow us to close off one of the magical barriers. Looking at our clan board, you'll notice that the action that I must take in order to further develop my clan is to receive a glory point, and I can only get this benefit once per turn. Well, I'm inside my very first turn. I did just receive my first glory point, so that means I can uptick development in one of these 2 paths for my clan. And this decision really just comes down to your overall strategy and what you're trying to focus on. I've chosen to develop, or at least start developing, the right-hand side of my clan board here for the skill tree. Working my way down to the final battle is the very first benefit I can gain. Now, one thing I should have done before I even interacted and captured that fortress was to pay the gold associated with the movement I had spent. And I had moved 4 separate pieces of road worth in distance, which means it's going to cost me 4 gold, dropping me from 6 down to 2. And just like that, we're all squared away. We still have some remaining gold. Let's see what other options we have. Now for my next action, I'm actually going to take a look at, remember when I explained this earlier, this is giving you heads up information as to a 50% chance that you might roll on the die that the enemy AI is going to follow this pattern on its turn. It could also be one of the ones that aren't revealed, but it's good to look at this to get an idea as to what you can and can't do potentially in the future. You'll notice 3 rows down, it mentions that you cannot perform a location action on a location within range 2 of the shadow player. So what I might want to do before this actually activates and comes into play is do just that. Find something within 2 range of that individual, take advantage of it before this triggers and stops me. Now again, it's not guaranteed that that's what's going to happen, but preparing for this stuff is worthwhile. Looking around at the range that this shadow player can manipulate and stop me from potentially interacting with locations in the future, going out of range 2, which is essentially not counting the individual broken road in terms of counting range. It's talking about from one location to another location in terms of range, which means it can really start to spread out and block off what you can do. So it might be worth my effort here to spend 2 gold, head south to the village, and take it over. So the warrior clan spends 2 gold to move south, and then spends 2 gold per the requirement that's on the village. And again, it could be a lost soul that does this, or a hero, because neither are specified there. I pay 2 gold and 2 gold to move. That's a total of 4. That's all the gold I had left to capture this village. Now let's see what benefits we get from it. One thing to keep in mind is you might have cards that aren't instant effect cards, but these action cards can be triggered for their conditions, which are very handy if you choose to do so. This one, when you capture a village, allows you to place your hero on that village, thereby giving you some movement options in the future. Now, it's absolutely worth mentioning here, in this prototype form, I have 3 village cards, or actually 8 village cards that are set out when you begin the game for setup in the final version. In this prototype, I only had 3, but this works for the purposes of showing you the benefit you get for taking or capturing a village, which is you get to select one of these village cards and then get to take advantage of the benefit of that card. So you're going to want to choose wisely in these situations. Here are the 3 village cards you have to choose from up close. Remember, in the final game, you have 8 to choose from, and they are going to be across varying clans. In other words, certain ones will be more beneficial overall for your specific clan you're controlling. But remember, these cards are divided into 2 sections. The top section, with a dividing line in between, lets you know of an unconditional ability that you always get when you have this card in your possession. So that's why you can go after cards that, even if they have an icon like these 3 do here for the engineering clan, which I am not, I don't get to take advantage of the bottom half of the card, but I still can take advantage of the top half of the card. If I happen to get one that is warrior specific, which there is one, it's just not here in this prototype, that would be the best bang for buck, as I get something on top and bottom. But depending on your strategy, you might end up taking something that doesn't do that for you. So either way, in this case, I have to choose one of these, as I just conquered a village, and I'm going to select the one that makes the most sense for me. As insanely tempting as the one that allowed me to use any colored crystals to complete any quest was, I'm going to choose the one that actually helps me out when building roads. It's worth mentioning, when I get to the VP conversation at the end of this video, you'll find out quite quickly that roads have a very active part of the VP tally, so it's good to build them, and also saves you money as you traverse through them. Now at this point, I am done using my lost soul. I'm done using my hero. I think I'm going to end things right here. And there's nothing saying you have to use all of your gold or all of your mana in any given round. You're going to accumulate these things over and over again throughout turns over the production phase. So if you want to hold on to things because you have bigger plans in mind later on, you can do that. Now there was an area here that you need to keep your eye on, and that is your hit points. Now heroes are going to start the game with 5, as you know. Certain locations are going to take a hit off that HP as you go along, but a player's hero can't perform an action which would decrease the hero's HP below 1. So a good example of this is capturing a castle with a siege action costs 2 HP, so a hero must have at least 3 to perform the action. So you do have to keep an eye on your HP levels to ensure you can handle whatever it is you're doing without dropping to 0. And the same applies to a hero that wants to initiate a battle or perform a location action with only 1 HP. You can't even do it in battles. However, you might get dragged into a battle that you didn't initiate, and in those situations, if you do lose an HP during battle, the HP is reduced to, but it really just remains at 1, because inside of this game the hero doesn't actually die, but it is going to put major restrictions on what you can actually interact with and do inside the game. So this instantly brings up the conversation about healing, because you obviously need to get your HP back up to good levels in order to be able to interact and be able to progress throughout the game itself in a positive way. You can heal in one of 3 ways. You can go to the source of life location, which is in the middle of the board. Unfortunately right now that is where the shadow player is residing, but that shadow player will start to move around eventually and won't be there forever. And then the other way is you can bump to maximum health on a healing well locations. You can go straight to the healing well to get your health that way. You can also get a maximum health on your own capital. So if I happen to go back to my capital, bump myself right back up. Let's just quickly talk about a couple locations that are very key to try and take over as your clan. You're going to want to try to focus on locations like castles, for instance, as not only do they give you a benefit of 2 gold and 1 action card when you take them over, although you're taking a 2 HP hit to try and do so, you have to remember during the production phase, for every castle that you have, you're going to get an increase in gold of 2. So you really can start generating quite a bit of income if you take over those castles. Another location you're going to want to take advantage of are tunnels. There is a tunnel system underneath the game board itself that will help you to move from a tunnel to a castle. Now, if you're playing multiplayer with other players around the table, if you move into a tunnel, you can go into a castle and try to capture it if that castle is controlled by a different player. However, in solo play, no one else is capturing castles, so they're open to be captured all the time. So you do have to spend the 1 gold specified under the location in order to use that tunnel to get to a castle that hasn't been captured and take it over. So essentially the requirement that sits there still stands. You'll never get into a situation where you find a captured castle of another faction when playing solo. Right in the middle of the shot there, you'll see the relic location with a relic token on it. You simply move there with your hero and you can take that relic. Again, once you work your way up to 5, you can cash it in to take out a magical barrier that specifies the usage of relics. Now, just up to the northeast, you're going to see a temple. And if you interact here, these are quite expensive. They're 3 golds. You can see those little nodes around it. They're going to allow you to either pay 2 gold to draw 1 quest card or pay 3 gold to draw 2 quest cards and choose one to keep and discard the other. So this is your way of generating additional quests you can go on, which again will help you with those magical barriers. You'll notice on the icon itself for the temple, there is a dash between 2 of the pips. And that again is just letting you know you've got 2 options there, which I just mentioned, the 2 cost or the 3 cost. There is a quick reference sheet inside the game which not only will spell out all the icons that you're going to come across inside the game, but also show you the different variations of the costs associated on all those locations. There's a couple I haven't gone over, but you'll see them listed here. With our hero turn done, we now move to the shadow player. The very first thing we're going to do is grab the production die, give it a roll to find out which of these event cards is going to be the one that triggers. 50-50 chance on it being the black one. Let's find out. Oh, it ends up being green, so we're in for a surprise. Taking a look at the very top row for this card, it lets us know based on that skull token, we're going to be increasing the shadow power overall by the specified value, so +2. We'll do that in a moment. And then to the right of it, it's an increase of the shadow VP by the specified value. So yeah, these cards are even generating victory points that will be tallied at the end of the game, but you're still keeping track of them on the shadow victory point track. The shadow power in the land has increased by 2, and now let's bump up the victory points by 4 for the shadow player. Just like that, victory points have been ticked up, and we can continue through the event card. Now, just before we do this, I want to show you the Arwell's Blessing side again. We talked about this earlier in the video, but here is where it can be useful for you to keep an eye on this, as you can use these blessings. They're going to cost you gold and VP to do so, but they're able to kind of mitigate some of the nastiness that comes from event cards in different aspects of the shadow player. So keep your eye on this and make use of it in your strategy. The next row on the card states to move the shadow player towards a castle as depicted inside the green circle icon. It's worth mentioning that when you're resolving that particular row in terms of movement for the shadow player, you might see a white arrow, as we're about to resolve right now, a green arrow which points back, or a red arrow that points forward. And those three have variations in terms of how they're resolved. We're going to focus on just the white one for the purposes of this video, which essentially means that the shadow player is going to move to the closest castle in this situation that's closest to our hero. So taking a look at the castles around me here, the ones closest to the hero, there's actually one just north of where the shadow player currently resides. It's basically half cut off, but there is a castle up there, and then to the southeast there's a castle as well. Both of those castles, if the shadow player moves to either, are equal distance to the hero. So in a case of a tie, you get to choose. I've gone ahead and decided which castle this shadow player is moving to, and now you'll see the source of life in the very middle of the game board is accessible, at least in terms of not having to deal with a battle anymore with the shadow player. We now move to resolve the third row, which is called Event 1, and basically this only triggers if your hero is within the specified range on the image, it's actually 2 here, of the shadow hero after the shadow hero's movement ends. So we've moved the shadow hero, and if our hero is within 2 location range away, which we unfortunately are, then that means we cannot perform a location action on a location within range of 2 of the shadow player next turn. The final row is the event 2, which is to activate the source of control. Now, you saw this at the very beginning of the video and likely don't remember this, but there's a number of sources that can be activated on the shadow player board, which is on the left-hand side of this entire game board. I'm going to show you it up close and you'll see what kind of advantage comes out of it. Now, on top of this thing activating, it's also going to unfortunately cause me to randomly choose to discard 1 card from my hand. As I alluded to moments ago, we've gone ahead, placed a relic token on the relic icon that's right next to source of control. We're going to trigger it based on what I mentioned. At the end of the shadow's turn, the shadow player randomly chooses a card held by any clan hero, which is going to be me. That player must discard that card. So I'm going to take the cards that I have in my hand, I'm going to shuffle them underneath the table and discard 1 at random. It's the end of the shadow player's turn, and the random card drawn after shuffling them and not looking at them, I got this one, which is one of my action cards is now discarded. Even though the shadow player's turn is done, we want to talk about a couple things that can happen inside of what the shadow player is capable of doing. And one of those things is when the overall shadow power increases to 9 or greater, basically gets to the end of that track. There are some things that happen. First off, our curse token is revealed off the top of that curse token deck, which is going to add some fun into the fray. And also you're going to, of course, reset the power back down to 0 and draw and resolve a darkness card. Here's an example of what a curse token looks like, as well as a shadow card flipped over. You'll see the token states discard 5 gold, and if you have 2 gold or less, you can't win. So you really need to get your gold up first off. And then it says here for the darkness card, going through the magical path costs +2 gold. Now, normally it costs 3 gold. You go through a portal to the Nordic portal way at the top of the board, and then you move to the magical path, which costs 3 normally. Now it costs 5. And this is all just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what can come out from the shadow player to hinder you across multiple sources that can activate. And also, again, if you're wrapping around with the shadow power over and over and over again, well, curses are coming out, those shadow darkness cards are coming out, things are going to get progressively tougher for you. All right, so we understand that if we get up to 9 or above 9, that the shadow power is going to reset, bring out another card that's going to sit in play and cause all kinds of nastiness going forward. We want to try to mitigate how often that's happening. And you're able to do this by using the sacrificial altar area that not only allows you to mitigate the amount of shadow power that's increasing on you up to 9 and having more of those cards, those permanent cards coming into play that are going to cause grief for you, but also the source activation, which is going to give abilities for the darkness to use, which you really don't want to see either. So what can we do in the sacrificial altar area? Well, essentially on your turn, you can choose to go ahead and discard 1 gold or 1 mana or 1 item in order to get a sacrificial token. You then place the token up in the sacrificial area here, or the altar. Now for the number of clans that are currently present in the game world, and I'm playing solo, there's only 1, we only focus on the skull, the single skull, that has a 2, 3, and a 4 candle across the top. What do those mean? Well, let's say I went ahead and burned 1 gold to get 1 of my red markers and go ahead and place it up into that area. You can essentially just go ahead and place it just above the actual numerical value. The more sacrificial tokens that you put along those candles, the more mitigation that you have. You can choose to cash that in for its lower value, which means if I did it right now, I could cash it in and I could knock the 2 shadow power that just went up by 2 back down to 0. Or I could sit here and wait, continue to sacrifice as I put more tokens on it to get the maximum value of being able to knock it down by 4. You can also mitigate, in other words, turn off sources of, all the sources I should say, underneath of the sacrificial altar as well, and manipulate which ones are on, which can really help you stay away from some nasty effects. The one thing to note again is that the cards that come out of that shadow deck, those cards stay in play. You can't mitigate them, so you're really trying to keep that shadow power from wrapping around over and over again, putting a lot of cards in front of you that are going to cause you a lot of harm. At this point, you've now seen a full round of gameplay inside the game, giving you a better appreciation of how it operates and flows. There's a couple locations I want to talk about specifically, and then I'm going to go into one quick battle example as if my hero and the shadow player had been in the same location and we initiated a battle. But first, let's talk about these 2 locations that I glazed over earlier. One is the market. The market's a really important one because when a hero or a lost soul steps into the market, you can exchange items, whether they're crystals or relics, between the market and their own capital. This can give you a lot of different options. For each item you moved from their capital to the market, you can move 1 item from the market to their capital. And this action is completely free, and there's no limit to the number of items that can be exchanged, provided the exchange rate is a 1-to-1. You'll also find the ability as a player to sell unused cards. This is everything except for village cards, and the same thing goes with that source of control ability that we resolved earlier. You're not going to put a village card into your deck, shuffle it, and have that be discarded. The village cards are set in stone so long as you actually hold a village that you actually gain that card from. Once you lose the village, then you lose the card. Now when you start a brand new round, as you saw at the very beginning of gameplay, you go ahead and uptick the day counter. So right now we would actually move that hourglass up by 1 space, and when we do this, we take a look at the market, and if the market didn't have all these resources sitting in it, we'd reset it so that it does. This market should have 3 relics, 3 green crystals, 2 yellow crystals, and a red crystal, which if you'll notice, I did miss placing an extra yellow crystal, which I just did. So how does a battle initiate when playing solo? Well, it occurs if you move your hero to the shadow hero's location, the shadow hero moves to your location, an event card's activated which triggers a battle because the shadow hero is within a specified range. Those are the 3 ways it can happen. In this example, I basically just move myself straight there, and a battle's going to commence. A battle with the shadow player works like this. You're going to choose which of your own battle cards you want to use. Again, you have to take a look at your resource board to ensure you're not using too many battle cards beyond what you have for HP. I'm allowed to use up to 2, but I only have 1 right now, so I'll be adding this into the fray, which is a 2 value. I might have gotten the additional +1 at the top if it matched my clan, but it doesn't. At this point, we now draw an event card for determining the Shadow's combat power, and at this point, we then draw battle cards for the Shadow hero as determined by the number in the bottom right-hand corner. So we're going to be drawing 4 cards that'll come from the battle deck. As you can see here, going up against the shadow player is pretty painful in the early stages of the game, especially when you haven't built yourself up strong enough yet, so you're probably not going to want to entertain a battle like this. But let's go ahead and find out how we resolve the battle by calculating our CP. So adding up the CP for my warrior clan, pretty straightforward. Taking a look at the development board, you'll remember there was a banner there with a +4. That's what I have as my starting CP stat. The battle card 2 that I played brings it up to a 6, which you can see just from that alone is not going to be enough, as the shadow player has 6, 7, 8, 9. The other thing, if I happen to be at a fortress location, I'd get a location modifier of +2, which would bring me up a little further, but not enough still to even take it out. So you can see how having a number of battle cards in hand is going to be worthwhile to try to get you over the hump against the shadow player. There's also the potential to have blessings, which can also increase things as well. If you lose the battle, which I just did, then I choose an item, if I have any, on my capital and return it to the supply. Now, I've been keeping the one crystal that I have right on top of my development board, but that's just because it's within easier reach than me placing it on my capital. When you gain resources, typically place them up on your capital to keep them in one spot. So in this case, I would lose that yellow crystal from my supply. If I had of one, I would steal an item from the Shadow Hero's capital, and remember, the Shadow Hero has a number of items I can choose from if I win. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen, but here's what I would have to choose from had I won, and also as soon as you take something, you're going to replace it. You'll continue progressing throughout the game, closing magical barriers, and when you do so, you'll be placing one of your markers on the magical barrier in the column to let you know and remind yourself you've closed that one up. You'll make your way to the final area of the game, progressing through as many magical barriers as possible, and then you're going to be tallying up your overall VP. You're going to do this by following all the bulleted points here on this reference card. So for each road built, you're going to gain a VP. For each item in the player's capital at the end of the game, 1 VP or 3 VP for each purple crystal. Each captured location, castle, fortress, or village held by a player at the end gives you 1 VP. Each point of mana the player has remaining gives you 1. The sum of the VP awarded for each magical barrier completed by the player is going to give you that much VP, which is really important. And then the VP corresponding to the position of the player's hero on the magical barriers at the end will also give VP. So all this tallied together gives you your total score. And you'll go ahead and compare it up against the Shadow's victory point track to determine who is the winner. It's important to note that inside the game Legacy of Thracks: The Awakening, there is also a story or narrative booklet you're going to get as well. Now, this is the prototype form of that booklet. I'm going to show you a couple of pages on the inside to give you a rough idea as to what it looks like and what it will entail. This is going to flesh out the backstory of the game itself and give you that narrative in order to immerse you in the world even further. Within the book, you'll see it broken out by chapter 1 through 15. I'll show you a couple more pages so that you can go ahead and read chapter number 1 if you're interested in the narrative. As you read through the book, you're going to also run into artwork throughout. That's going to sum things up for chapter number 1, and you can even start to see chapter number 2 here as well. And that, my friends, is going to wrap up this game overview and gameplay video diving into Legacy of Thracks: The Awakening. If you want to know more about this, stay tuned for the upcoming crowdfunding campaign landing in April, which will have even more details around the gameplay, the game flow. But what you've seen here in this video should help you make an informed decision as to whether or not this is a game of interest to you. Thank you guys so much. Let me know any comments or questions that you have down below. If you're not part of our Facebook group, definitely join us there. We have a Patreon as well. We also have a Discord, which is extremely active. We'd love to have you there. There's links for all of that at the top of the pinned comment. Thanks again, and as always, keep on rolling solo.